do it. Let's go through all the seats. For those who spent the night watching and listening and trying to figure it all out, let's go through it one by one so we can just clear it all up now. Let's start with Tasmania. It's a state where Labor holds all 5 seats, but they were really expecting that they could lose 1 or 2 tonight. There's certainly the seat of Bass and the seat of Braddon. Both those seats were under pressure. The Libs were very hopeful of getting them. People I spoke to early last week thought they still might pick them up. And in the end, Labor did get a swing to it, I think, in Tasmania, a slight swing to it, and it held all those seats.
In the end, there was no change in Tasmania. Bass, the most marginal of the seats. Michelle O'Byrne trying to break the habit of people of Bass changing member. She's held on to the seat. She's outpolled the Liberal candidate there, and after the distribution of preferences, she's got a swing of just under 2% to her. Michelle O'Byrne has held the seat of Bass. And
Braddon, like Bass, Labor used to thought they would have to assign it to the Tampa zone, and that didn't happen.
Well, Sid Sidebottom has retained the seat for the Labor Party. He's gained a swing of 1.5% to him, and Braddon has remained in Labor hands, as has Denison, which is a much safer electorate in central Hobart. Almost no change in the result, but Duncan Kerr's won easily, got over half of the primary vote. Franklin, of course, there was some interest because of Peter Hodgman giving up his state seat to contest the federal seat of Franklin. Unfortunately, he hasn't won. He got about the vote, in fact, for the Labor Party went up, and Harry Quick has been returned to Parliament with an increased majority.
And the last seat in that state of Tasmania, Lions, also stayed with Labor?
Dick Adams has held it comfortably. He's had a 3% swing against him, but in the end, Dick Adams is back as the member of Lions.
And what about Victoria? Victoria was said to be soft for the Liberals. It was the state where Labor thought they could make the gains that they needed. Remember, they came into this only needing to pick up 6 seats to win victory. Now, they're a long way short of that, and Victoria didn't really come to Labor like they hoped it would.
Yeah, well, in fact, there's a fall in the Labor vote, as you can see there, and a rise in the Liberals and Greens. The Greens have done very much better in Victoria than they've ever done before. The first seat, of course, is Aston, which is famous for the by-election several months ago, and the same contestants for the major parties. Same result. In fact, same winner, slightly different result because this has recorded a 2% swing to the Liberal Party compared to the last election. That's 6% higher than the by-election, and Chris Pearce is back in Parliament after winning at the by-election.
And Ballarat, Labor always thought they might get Ballarat. It turns out Ballarat might be the only seat Labor gets tonight, Labor won tonight. So in Victoria, that's a good result for Labor, but not unexpected.
And certainly Catherine King is the new Labor member for Ballarat, a big swing to her, in that 5% swing to her, one of the best in the country.
Martin Ferguson, seat of Batman?
Well, Martin Ferguson's held it very comfortably. He's got 60% of the vote. Tiny swing against him after preferences, but essentially a strong seat there.
And what about Bendigo? There was some fear, even in the last 24 hours amongst the Labor camp, they might pick up Ballarat and lose Bendigo.
Steve Gibbons has held the majority at this stage. A 0.1% swing is quite minor. Steve Gibbons has been returned as a member for Bendigo.
And Bruce?
Alan Griffin has been returned as a member for Griffin, just under 50% of the vote. After preferences, a swing of about 1.5% of him. So Alan Griffin back in Parliament. Burke's seen a change because Neil O'Keefe was retiring, and he has been replaced by Brendan O'Connor, who's the new Labor member for Burke. A swing of about 2% against him, which is predominantly rural electorate. It's a rather funny electorate for Labor to hold with such a majority. Brendan O'Connor is the new Labor member for that electorate.
And what about the seat of Calwell?
Well, Andrew Theophanous had left the Labor Party. He's only got 10% of the vote. The new Labor candidate, new Labor member is Maria Vampikanu, I think it's pronounced. I apologise if I got that wrong. But she's been comfortably elected with over 50% of the primary vote.
And Casey, one of those belt of seats that Labor thought might be a bit soft for the Libs?
Well, Peter Costello's lost one of his staffers in Tony Smith, who's the new member for Casey. He succeeds Michael Wooldridge in that seat, and it's a swing of about 2.5% to him.
Chisholm, which was a Labor seat that Labor was a bit worried about too, again, thinking it could be vulnerable to those asylum seekers, that backlash over asylum seekers.
Michael Wooldridge's previous seat, of course, Anna Burke, she's ahead on primary votes, and she'll go on to win. She's in fact got a small swing to her after preferences, but Anna Burke's continuing as the member for Chisholm.
And Corangamite.
A seat there was a lot of talk about several months ago as part of the rural backlash. Now, in fact, the swing's quite small, about 0.8 against the Labor Party. Stuart MacArthur will win the seat, but basically not much change in that electorate.
What about Corio?
Gavin O'Connor's comfortably re-elected, just under 50% of the primary vote, 2.6% swing against the Labor Party.
And Deakin has stayed with the Libs. That was a skinny margin there too?
Still a skinny margin, 0.3% swing to the Liberal Party. It's gone from 1.9 to 2.2 as a margin.
And what about Bruce Bilson in Dunkley? A couple of months ago, he was a bit fearful, though he never gave up.
He's got quite a very good result. He's got a 3.6% swing to him. He's ended up with, after preferences, 55.6% of the vote, which gets very close to being classed as a safe rather than a marginal seat. So Bruce Bilson will be happy with that.
Flinders was another seat that 6 months ago Labor thought they could pick up. Peter Reith announced he was retiring. That gave them, Labor, perhaps even more room for hope. They didn't get it.
Labor got nowhere in that election. They got 33% of the vote. Greg Hunt, son of Alan Hunt, former upper house member of the Victorian Parliament. Greg Hunt's a very well-qualified young man to be entering the Parliament for the Liberal Party.
And another former Liberal staffer worked with Alexander Downer. What about the seat of Gellibrand?
Nicola Roxon held this since the last election when she replaced Ralph Willis. She's retained it with a swing of about 4%, but she still has a majority of well over 20%, so it's a very safe seat.
And Gippsland has held well with the coalition, even though that was a soft spot for Jeff Kennett, of course, in his surprise loss.
Well, there's a lot of vote there with independents, other independents. Peter McGorran, Julian's the senator in the upper house. Peter McGorran's held that seat. Again, the National Party vote's not too great in Gippsland. There's still a lot of resentment in that area over a few things.
Goldstein?
David Kemp's been comfortably returned. It's about a 2% swing to him. David Kemp's back in Parliament.
Higgins, we've seen Peter Costello celebrating tonight already.
Ah, well, 0.9% swing to the Labor Party, one of the few seats that saw a swing to the Labor Party. So, but Peter Costello, I mean, very comfortably re-elected anyway. There's been 2 Liberal Prime Ministers represent Higgins, Holt and Gorton. The question is, will Costello be the next?
Well, speaking of Holt, and I think Peter Costello perhaps might be the next.
Well, Holt is, of course, held by Anthony Byrne. He replaced Gareth Evans when the referendum was held on the day of the Republican by-election. He got a 1.5% swing against him. It's still Anthony Byrne's back in Parliament as a member for Holt.
And Simon Crean is back as the member for Hotham for Labor?
Very easily re-elected.
What about Indi? We've got a new candidate in Indi, I think.
Sophie Panopoulos replaces Lou Lieberman as the Liberal member for Indi. There was some concern that she came from the city and that wouldn't be popular, but in the end the National Party only got 12% of the vote. Sophie Panopoulos is the new member for Indi.
That was quite a hard-fought three-corner contest, I think. What about an Isaacs?
Well, the Labor Party was talking about some concern here. In the end, they did suffer a substantial fall, about 3.6% swing, bigger than normal. It's done in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne, but Anne Corcoran has been returned as a member for Isaacs.
And in the seat of Jagga, Jenny Macklin's seat, no trouble there?
No change there, virtually no swing. Quite a vote for the Democrats and Greens there, and Jenny Macklin's back in Parliament.
And Petro Georgiou and Kooyong?
Basically the same result as last time. Petro Georgiou has comfortably held one of the blue ribbon seats of Melbourne, Kooyong.
Latrobe, we get back to that belt of seats that were really there on skimpy margins. The Libs were very worried about these seats 6 months ago.
Well, once again, the eastern suburbs of Melbourne have stayed with the Liberal Party. Labor Party's made no gains in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. In Latrobe, there's a 2.5% swing to the Labor Party. Bob Charles is back, having been elected in 1990. He's still there.
And Layla?
Lawler. I think
Lawler.
Barry Jones will correct you on that.
Lawler, I'm sorry about
Julia Gillard, she took the seat on last time after Barry Jones retired. Julia Gillard is the returned. About 4% swing against her, but she still holds it with a substantial majority.
And a couple of weeks ago, the Libs were reporting an 8% swing to them in that seat, so I guess that Labor came back there. What about in the Mallee?
Oh, well, John Forrest has comfortably retained that for the National Party. One of the higher votes for One Nation in Victoria there, with 8.9%, still very comfortably won by the Nationals.
And Maribyrnong?
Bob Sercombe comfortably returned. He's got a 5% swing against him, but still it's a very safe Labor seat, and he has held on to it. In a number of these safe seats where the Labor Party has suffered, there seems to be quite a vote for the Democrats and Greens.
Now, what about McEwen? McEwen was always going to be a tough seat for Fran Bailey. She's lost it, won it, lost it. Where is it at?
Looks like she's held on to it. She's comfortably ahead after the distribution of preferences, and Fran Bailey looks like winning McEwen.
And McMillan was really troubling for the ALP this morning. They were very, very concerned about it.
They had no trouble at all in the end. They outpolled the Liberals by 5% on primaries. They got a 1.7% swing to him, and Christian Zara, I think he's currently the youngest MP, retains his seat in Parliament. The first member for McMillan to retain his seat in well over a decade. It's been a real graveyard for sitting members.
And that is a strong zone, a strong result considering the demographic of that seat. What about Melbourne?
No particular swing there. Lindsay Tanner is re-elected. His primary vote's well down. The Greens, in fact, you see they've polled nearly 16% of the vote, the Democrats 9%.
That's a huge vote.
Some of
the
the inner city seats have seen really big votes for the Greens and Democrats at the Labor Party's expense. So if there's a Cafe Latte seat in the inner suburb, they really have expressed some displeasure in some of these seats.
And one of the stories of this campaign will be the high Greens vote in the House of Reps. Melbourne Ports stayed safe.
Same story there. 6% down for the Labor primary vote, 7% up for the Greens. And the Greens have done very well with people who are really unhappy, you suspect, with the Labor Party's position on vote people.
And Menzies?
A 4% swing against the Labor Party to the sitting member Kevin Andrews, and Kevin Andrews is re-elected, got over half of the primary vote.
Murray? stay with the Libs?
Sharman Stone has been re-elected. Sharman Stone has 67.7% of the primary vote. He's comfortably re-elected.
It was once a safe National Party seat, I think. And what about Scullin?
Well, Harry Jenkins Jr., having succeeded his father in 1985, he's comfortably re-elected. Harry Jenkins Jr. back in the Parliament.
And Wannon?
Malcolm Fraser's old seat, David Hawke, has held it comfortably, a 2% swing to the Liberal Party. David Hawke back in Parliament. Even the Greens even got 3.4% there.
And the final seat in Victoria, Wills?
Another one of those seats where there's been a swing from the Labor Party to the Greens, 7% down in the Labor primary vote. Kelvin Thompson is comfortably re-elected as a member for Wills.
Anthony, that brings us to the ACT. The ACT, traditionally Labor territory in the House of Representatives, and the seat of Canberra, Bob McMullen's seat, have been talking to
no,
all night.
Annette Ellis. He switched,
oh, I'm sorry, Annette Ellis.
They switched seat last time. Annette Ellis is comfortably returned. A small swing against there were some spectacular swings against the Labor Party early on. I don't know which booths they were from, but they were spectacular. But he settled down in the end, and Annette Ellis is comfortably re-elected with roughly the same vote as last time.
And I should know, of course, Bob McMullen's seat, because I had to vote in the seat of Fraser today.
He switched seat. He's now the member for Fraser. He's had a swing of about 2.5% against him, but he still holds it with a margin of 12%. Bob McMullen comfortably elected there.
Well, let's go to the largest state now, New South Wales. New South Wales was a seat Labor really needed to improve in. 12 weeks ago, Labor was very confident of picking up seats in the outer west. They were confident of picking up Parramatta, which was notionally theirs. Macarthur, again, notionally theirs. And knocking off Jackie Kelly and Lindsay. Of course, they got nowhere near that. And they also thought they had Richmond and Eden Monero in the bag. As it turns out, none of that happened, really.
Well, not much change. All that's happened in the end in New South Wales is the three seats that swapped in the redistribution. I think gone back to where they came from. I have to check Patterson. I forgot about Patterson. Let's start with Banks. In the first election, Banks, this was a seat that was talked that the Labor Party could possibly lose. In the end, they have suffered a substantial swing, about 4.5%, and it's now a marginal seat again. But in the end, Darryl Mellom has won the seat. In the end, I suspect the Liberal Party's on-the-ground troops. There just aren't enough people for the Liberal Party in that electorate.
There was the same sort of talk for a while through this campaign about Barton, another safe Labor seat. Was there any significant swing against Robert McClellan and Barton?
Same swing, about 4%. He'll hold it comfortably again. I suspect in the end again, just the Liberal Party didn't put an awful huge effort into some of these seats. I think they put more effort into seats like the Bell, which they were really trying to knock off a senior front bencher.
And John Howard's seat of Bennelong.
He's had a 2.5% swing to him. He's won 52.3% of the primary vote and wins that seat comfortably.
Barara?
Philip Ruddock has, his primary vote's up 4%, but after the distribution of preferences, there's a swing of 2% to him. But Philip Ruddock, it's a very safe seat for Barara, and he's held it comfortably.
More good news for Philip Ruddock in this campaign. What about the seat of Blaxland?
Well, Michael Hatton's vote's down. There's about a 6% swing against the Labor Party in this seat. One Nation have run 1/3 in that seat, which has a very large ethnic population. Paul Keating's old seat, of course, but still a very safe Labor heartland.
Not much of a Green vote there, I note, in that area of Sydney. What about Bradfield?
Well, again, Bradfield, very safe Liberal Party seat, and Brendan Nelson very comfortably returned with the same majority he had at the last election. No particular swing there.
Calare, I think a huge vote for Peter Andren, the Independent.
Very rare to see an independent get 50% of the vote, especially at federal elections. That is a superb result for Peter Andren. And despite some of the attacks upon him because of his opposition to the government stand on vote people, Peter Andren's very comfortably returned. He's very popular in that electorate.
It's a bit of a vote like we saw in Warringah, really, because Peter Andren was very outspoken through this campaign against the government. In the seat of Charlton?
Kelly Hoare continues to hold the seat for her family. She's the daughter of the former member, Bob Brown. She's been forced to preferences this time. They've suffered a 5% swing, but she'll still be the member for Charlton.
Labor was very worried about that seat. What about Chifley, Anthony?
Well, there's a 7% swing in that election, but Roger Price still had a huge buffer and has been comfortably returned.
And Cook?
Bruce Baird is a 5.5% swing to him. He's got 56.6% of the primary vote. And he's actually, he's won the seat comfortably.
And Cowper, I think there's a change of member in Cowper, isn't there? Do we have a new member?
Yes, Luke Hartsucker. Hartsucker, I think. I've forgotten the name. I've forgotten the pronunciation after 6 hours on
It's the National Party, anyway.
He's succeeded Gary Neal. He's running second there, but the Liberals are third. His Liberal preferences will get him over the line. Jenny Bonfield, Labor Party, had hopes before the Tampa incident, but since then, no swing at all. So the Labor Party's done all right on the North Coast, but not enough to win any of these seats.
What about Stephen Martin in Cunningham? Was he affected at all?
7% swing against him. There was an independent, Trevor Mott, there. He's ended up running fifth. So Steve Martin will win that seat. definitely. Yes, he will win that seat.
DeBell is still shaky. The Libs are inclined to claim it. Labor's not inclined to give it up yet.
At the end of the night, with all booths in and preferences counted, Michael Lee's 650 votes behind. And that's a lot of votes to turn around. You'd have to say at the end of the night, he'll probably fall just short.
I wonder if he's been that far behind at a count at this point in the count.
Not
before.
that far behind.
What about Eden Monero? Again, looks like another disappointment for Labor. They were really confident they could get this.
There's a 1% swing to the Liberal Party in the end. Gary Nance has increased the majority. He's got 51.3%. Gary Nan has been returned as the member for Eden Monero. Again, Eden Monero has gone with government.
And Farrer, Tim Fisher left Farrer, and there was a three-corner contest in there. It's proved a bit difficult for the Nats. How do they go?
I'm leaving this one in doubt. It depends on national preferences, Labor preferences, which flow to the National Party. Look, the Electoral Office hasn't counted preferences that way. You really will have to wait, but they need to get a strong flow of Labor preferences to do that. And in a seat like that, the Labor Party doesn't always hand out a lot of how-to-vote cards, and there'll be a lot of leakage of preferences there.
Okay, what about the seat of Fowler?
Well, I was interested to see how Unity did here. Unity have got 5.4%, 6% swing against the Labor Party up preferences. And Julia Irwin, who got some notoriety recently for a criticism of Alexander Downer over gestures in the Parliament, she's comfortably re-elected in the end, in a very, very safe Labor seat.
Well, some notoriety too in the seat of Gilmore on the south coast of New South Wales, and the Labor candidate Peter North.
The biggest swing in the country has occurred in the seat of Gilmore, a swing of over 10%. Peter North was always a controversial candidate, and his comments in the campaign haven't helped, and he certainly is not popular with a 10% swing, the biggest in the country. Joanna Gash now has what is classified as a very safe instead of a marginal seat.
And Joanna Gash would be very happy about that, because there's a lot of caravan park dwellers in her seat, and it's one point that thought the GST on caravan park rents might make a problem there.
Greenlaw. Anthony Albanese.
Anthony Albanese.
He's my local
Larry
member.
Anthony named him as the big loser tonight.
My local member and a man I share a birthday with. He's got a 6%, his vote is down 6%, that's gone to the Greens once again, and in his city seat where there's been a bit of a shift from the Labor Party to the Greens.
And the seat of Greenway?
Well, this is another one of those seats on the outer west of Sydney, which people were talking about there being a huge swing. There was one of the largest in Sydney, 6.8%. Frank Mossfield, who's not particularly well known, he's not very well known in Canberra, certainly, but he's holds now a marginal seat. He will win the seat. Again, the Liberals don't have a lot of on-the-ground troops out there. That was a bad result. The call to Australia, the Christian Democrats have run third in that election.
What about John Anderson in his seat of Guaido? At one point, it thought he was going to be under heavy assault. He did have an independent running.
He's won it comfortably. He's got over 50%. Like John Anderson's been comfortably re-elected. Bruce Haig, in fact, ran fourth, the independent, the one who challenged him.
I think he'd be disappointed with that. What about Hughes?
4% swing against the Labor Party. Dana Vale's got over half the vote this time. She's won comfortably.
And that must again be now a safe seat now.
Now a safe seat.
Hume.
Albie Schultz is re-elected, 2% swing to him. He's got over 50% of the primary. Albie Schultz has won the election of Hume.
How did Labor go in their seat of Hunter?
No problem in Hunter. Everyone, in 15 years I've been following politics, the Labor Party's always complained about Hunter. They were going to lose Hunter. That was with the former member, Joel Fitzgibbon's father. Joel's held up comfortably despite the concern. One Nation got 10% there. They did well in Cessnock at the state election, I remember. Joel Fitzgibbons had a swing against him, but held it without any difficulty.
Kingston Smith, any swing there against sitting member Laurie Breton?
4% swing against the Labor Party. Laurie Breton's gone to preferences, but will still hold it comfortably.
And Lindsay, I think a triumph for Jackie Kelly.
In the end, a 3% swing against Labor Party. She's increased her margin to 6.3%.
And the seat of Lowe?
Well, in the end, only a small swing against Labor, and John Murphy's been re-elected in that electorate.
Lyne, which is Mark Vale's seat.
Mark Vale, pretty much the same, a slight swing to him, and he's got over half the vote, and Mark Vale's re-elected.
And MacArthur, another disappointment for Labor tonight.
Well, as one of the polls showed last week, an AC Nielsen poll, Pat Farmer didn't even need preferences, and he's comfortably elected in MacArthur.
That's a huge result.
A seat that's gone with government for 50 years, and once again it's happened.
A huge result, and of course John Fay retiring there. What about in the seat of McKellar?
Bronwyn Bishop's comfortably re-elected. No problems there. Big vote for the Democrats and Greens in that electorate.
What about Macquarie?
Kerry Bartlett's been returned. He didn't even need preferences this time. Another seat where the Labor vote seems to have suffered a big primary vote swing from Liberal,
and
from Labor to Liberal.
Just a couple of elections ago, that was a swinging seat, wasn't it?
At a really good election, Labor wins Macquarie. Most of the time, it tends to fall just on the Liberal side.
Okay, how about Mitchell?
Alan Cadman, no problems in there. It's a very safe Liberal electorate, and Alan Cadman has very safely retained it.
New England has thrown up a new member of the Parliament.
Tony Windsor's got 45.8% of the vote. Tony Windsor has won that electorate at Rompton. That's a very good result for Tony Windsor.
And Newcastle.
Sharon Grierson has held the seat. Very low vote, 41.8% for the Labor Party, but they'll still win it. 7.5% for the Greens, 5.5% for the Democrats. Other votes off there with the Progressive Labor Party got 5%. But Sharon Grierson replaces Alan Morris as the member for Newcastle.
That's a very strong Green vote in a seat like that, isn't it?
The Greens do very well in Newcastle. Also, they've got seats on Newcastle, local government body up there.
How about...
They've got most of the older socialist vote that used to be cast in Newcastle.
How about North Sydney, Anthony?
Joe Hockey's held his vote from the last election. 56.5%. Joe Hockey's back to Parliament.
And Page?
Well, the Labor Party did quite well here. They roughly got the same result as last time. Ian Causley's won the... Well, the Labor Party came close on preferences, let me say. Their primary vote was down 6%. Tom Cooper's a local dairy farmer up there. The Greens always get a good vote. And there's a strong flow of preferences. And Terry Flanagan used to work for who works for the state member Harry Woods and the former federal member Harry Woods. He basically kept the Labor vote up there, which wasn't bad given some of the results elsewhere in the country.
Now, Parkes is a National Party seat, but they had a retiring member.
Yes, John Cobb is the new member for Parkes. He's the former head of the New South Wales Farmers Federation, and he's got over half the vote, and he's won the seat comfortably.
Parramatta, it was notionally a Labor seat. They thought they could win it for a while, then they gave it up, and the polls were showing Ross Cameron was going to romp it home. Did he? He
won it. He got a 4% swing. I think the poll on Thursday said 5%. 4%'s not bad. Probably 5% after distribution, after a few other things. But Ross Cameron, I think he's got a payoff there for a lot of hard work over the last 5 years.
And Patterson, the two-bob watch?
The Liberals have held it.
Liberals have taken it.
Well, it depends on your point. Bob Horne is a sitting member. Bob Baldwin's a former member, but on the new boundaries, it's a notional Liberal seat. The two Bob watches come out, and looks like Bob Baldwin is back in Parliament in Patterson. At this stage, he's ahead. He's got 51.2% after preferences. So Bob Baldwin has retained the seat for the Liberal Party, but defeated the sitting Labor member.
And I think that's a result Labor really wasn't expecting. What about in prospect?
Good. This is a seat where there's a young Liberal I know, 21-year-old Gareth Perkins from Maroubra was sent in to campaign in Prospect. He's done quite well, 4% swing to the Labor Party, to the Liberal Party, but there was never going to be any defeat for Janice Crosby in a very, very safe Labor electorate in Western Sydney.
What about Reid?
Laurie Ferguson's been returned a very good, it's a very safe Labor seat. Still a 5% swing in that electorate, and One Nation polled third in an electorate with a very high ethnic population.
And Richmond, Anthony, I think it's a seat that says it all tonight, really. If Labor didn't win Richmond, it had no hope of winning those 5 or 6 seats it needed to get government.
Well, yeah, it just had to be one of those seats they won, and they didn't. There's a swing about depends on which way, how you classify the seat, but I think there's a swing of 0.9 to 1% to Larry Anthony, and Larry Anthony has won the seat.
And Riverina?
Kay Hull has been returned as a member for Riverina. Swing to her at this election. Kay Hull returned. She had no Liberal opponent this time, so she won comfortably.
And what about Robertson? Again, Labor sank a fair bit of resources into that area.
Oh, they were pulling out resources as the campaign started, basically, because they knew they weren't going to win it. 4.6% swing, and Jim Lloyd now has a margin of 6.6%. It's a safe seat, according to some.
How about Shortland?
Jill Hall won it at the last election after shifting from State Parliament. Jill Hall has been comfortably returned. Doesn't need preferences. 3.5% swing against her, but Jill Hall's back in Parliament.
And the city seat of Sydney?
Another inner city seat. Labor primary vote is down 9%. You can see there the Greens have got 15, the Democrats 11. It's unusual to see only 4 seat candidates in Sydney, it must be said. But another one of those inner city seats where there's a shift from Labor to the minor parties.
Now, Throgsby is a seat where we had a outspoken candidate against the boat people policies, didn't we?
Throgsby, I'm not sure. Jenny George is certainly...
took over from Colin Hollis, I think.
Yes. Jenny George is the former ACTU head. Colin Hollis was retiring MP. He'd held the seat for close to 20 years. Jenny George is the new member for Throgsby on the South Coast.
And Warringah.
Tony Abbott in the end won comfortably. He's got over 50% of the primary vote. Had probably a lot more effort in than he's done in the past, and certainly a lot more direct mail, I suspect, than he's done in the past.
I think you could say he got a hell of a shock. And what about the seat of Watson, Leo McLeod's seat?
Leo McLeod's held the seat comfortably. 15 years ago, this was a marginal seat. Not anymore. It's a very safe Labor seat these days. This is actually the seat that contains the birthplace of John Howard at Earlwood. And so this is not the seat that John Howard grew up in, certainly. Leo McLeod holds it very comfortably.
And we haven't actually heard much about Wentworth tonight. It's a blue ribbon Liberal seat. Was there any move against the Liberals in this seat as expected?
No, there was a swing to the Liberal Party, about 1.5%. This is a seat where the Democrats directed preferences to the Liberal Party. I don't think it did them much good. The Green vote was up 5% there. The Labor vote, primary vote was down. The Liberal primary vote was up.
And the final seat in New South Wales, Werriwa, Mark Latham's seat, how did he go?
Oh, he's got a 5.5% swing against him. He will still hold the seat, but like a number of seats in that mid-range of New South Wales, there was a few problems for the Labor Party, but in the end, the margin was so big they held the seat.
Well, Anthony, let's have a look at South Australia. South Australia was a seat where Labor has been promising for a few elections now to pick up ground, and they just fall short every time. I think they've actually probably gone backwards, certainly to where they were hoping to be at the start of this campaign. Let's go through it. What about Adelaide?
Well, in Adelaide at the end of the day is too close to call, because the Labor Party, we believe, is on 50.1% after preferences. Strong flow of Democrat and Green preferences there. And at this stage, I think 1,083 votes ahead, Tim Stanley is, the barrister. But Trish Worth did very well on postals and absence last time, so we'll have to watch that.
Yeah, she had a very nervous wait, though, and I guess she's in for it again. What about the seat of Barker?
Patrick Seckers comfortably returned. He's got 54% of the primary vote, 2% swing to him after preferences.
And Benithan?
Interested to see this one. In fact, there was only a 3% swing against Labor. I was wondering if there'd be a stronger swing or not. And in the end, Martin Evans has comfortably returned. Shadow signs, folks.
And that brings us to Boothby?
Well, the Democrats got 19.8, but they still had to uphold the Labor Party, and they were still well short. Andrew Southcott's been forced the preferences, but in the end, he still holds the seat.
What about the seat of Grey, a huge seat?
2%, well, it covers about 90% of the state, 2% swing against the Labor Party. Barry Wakeland's comfortably returned, 54.7% of the primary vote.
And Hindmarsh, Chris Gallus, we heard from her earlier this evening.
1% swing to her. Chris Gallus re-elected in Hindmarsh.
Okay, what about, where do we go after Hindmarsh? Kingston, let's go to Kingston.
In Kingston, Dave Cox has been re-elected. Despite all the talk of him losing his seat, no change at all. In fact, no swing. Dave Cox had been re-elected in Kingston.
And the same goes for the other side of the ledger in Macon.
3% swing to Trish Draper in Macon. Trish Draper has been elected. She's got a margin of 3.8%. She'll still have to work to hold it next time. It's a bit bigger than she's got now.
Oh, it'll be a picnic compared to what she's been used to, I think. How about Mayo? Did the Democrats make any dent in Mayo?
No, they never were going to. They always had too much difficulty. I think you have to catch in a safe seat. You have to catch a sitting member sleeping. Alexander, he got his fright last time.
He got his wake-up call.
This time, he knew what he was doing and made sure that the work was done. In terms of just like constituency work, which is really tough to do when you're a minister, made sure that was done regularly, and it paid off this time. He's just comfortably held the seat.
Port Adelaide, a Labor seat through and through?
Well, yeah, and he's been comfortably held. Small swing against the Labor Party, but not much, and Rod Sorford is back in Parliament.
And how about Chris Pine in Sturt? How did he go?
No change there, 50.6%. Doesn't need preferences, but no swing after preferences.
And the final seat for South Australia, another large seat, Wakefield.
Neil Andrews, one of the few seats with a swing to Labor in South Australia. Neil Andrews comfortably won. He's the Speaker of Parliament, of course.
Well, how about Queensland, Anthony? It was said a while ago that if Labor was going to win this election, it would win seats in Queensland. There was 5 Liberal seats in that state held by the Liberals by a margin of less than 1%. It looked like easy pickings for Labor there for most of the year. Suddenly it all turned around.
Well, the big thing was, I think the Labor vote in the end roughly stayed as it was. One Nation vote went down, went to others, into the Liberal Party. And in the end, apart from Dixon, there's no change in Queensland. A couple of doubtfuls, which we'll come across in a few moments.
Well, let's just go through them quickly. What about Blair?
This is the One Nation tried to win with Pauline Hanson last time. In the end, no problem there. The One Nation vote's only half of what it was, a third of what it was last time. Cameron Thompson, comfortably re-elected. He's got 60% of the two-party preferred vote.
Conshacka and Bowman, they look set for a bit of a fright.
This is the marginal seat with a swing against the sitting member. Conshacka has been re-elected with a swing against him.
What about Brisbane?
Arch Bev has had a swing against him also in the end, but Arch Bev, well, he's coming from behind to win on Democrat and Green preferences. This is another seat with a Labor primary vote down, Democrat and Greens up. It seems that within 2 to 3 kilometres of the GPO in every city, the Labor vote is down and it's gone to the Democrat and Greens, but that trend hasn't showed up in the rest of the cities.
Okay, after Brisbane, where do we go? We go to Capricornia.
Well, the Labor Party's actually increased the margin in Capricornia.
It was a very tight margin, I think, wasn't it, originally?
Well, they got a huge swing last time, and there's some thought that it might go back, but Kirsten Livermore has actually increased the vote. National Party's John Lever, a crocodile farmer, didn't get anywhere in the end. Kirsten Livermore has won the seat.
What about Deanne Kelly in Dawson? You probably couldn't get a more outspoken local member, except perhaps for Bob Katter.
Well, it's paid off as well. She got a 3.5% swing to her after preferences, and she didn't even need primaries, didn't even need preferences.
And yet, in the middle of the year, she was very worried. Now, Cheryl Curnow in Dixon, Cheryl Curnow is gone.
Cheryl Curnow's defeated. I mean, she's a substantial fall in a primary vote, a rise in her Liberal primary vote. It translates into a 5.6% swing. And Cheryl Curnow is looking at a life after politics and has a strange suspicion she's feeling very relieved about it.
Well, I guess these things happen. How about Fadden?
5% swing against the Labor Party there. It's a seat they never had any real hope of winning. And David Jull has been returned to Parliament.
Fairfax, there was a bit of a threat to Alex Sommier in Fairfax there for a while. Did it
Well, the
eventuate?
Independents only ended up with 10% of the vote in the end, so Shane Porger made no mark, and Alex Sommier with 46.7% of the vote.
And Fisher?
Peter Slipper, he's got roughly the same vote as last time, and he's been re-elected, so Peter Slipper, I think he's a parliamentary secretary, and might be actually trying to get a... He's certainly very ambitious, and I'm sure he's pushing for a ministerial position.
He was
now.
one member, I think, to benefit from One Nation preferences
The
too.
former National Party MP as well, one of the few that suits the party.
Okay, let's take a look at Ford quickly.
Kay Elson has been comfortably returned. She's just fallen short of 50%, but will win on preferences. 2% swing to her. Kevin Rudd in Griffith. Kevin Rudd has done very well. He's actually got a swing to him of nearly 4%. And I think in the end, the Liberals had some quite low-profile candidates in some of these seats, and the Labor Party had to do some hard work in the end to hold on.
How about Groom?
Well, there was some interest in how the National Party would do here. In the end, they've made no impact, and Ian Macfarlane will be elected on National Party preferences. Ian Macfarlane re-elected.
Herbert, as usual, something we're not going to know for a few days or weeks yet?
No, in the end, I think Peter Lindsay will hold on. The swing is about 1% against the Labor Party. At this stage, it's saying the Liberal Party will retain that seat.
And it's no longer going to be the most marginal seat in the country?
No.
All right, what about Hinkler?
This is one that is doubtful. The Labor Party is ahead. At the end of the count, they're ahead by 601 votes, and that's tough to turn around. 600 is a lot of votes to turn around.
Kennedy?
But it is in doubt.
Kennedy, a huge result for Bob Katter?
Bob Katter, 47.5%. Bob Katter is returned as the member for Kennedy for the first time as an independent.
Leichhardt?
Warren Entsch comfortably returned just under 50%, 2% swing against the Labor Party. Probably would have got a bit of swing, but that would be one seat where the ANZAC collapse has her.
Wayne Swan in Lilly.
1.5% swing to him. Wayne Swan, no problems in the end.
What about Longman? Labor was hopeful once.
Mal Brough, 2.2% swing to him. Still marginal. I thought there might have been a bigger swing in Longman in the end, but in the end, Mal Brough got a 3% margin, so he's still got a marginal seat next time.
Poor thing. What about Maranoa?
Well, Bruce Scott doesn't have a marginal seat. Very comfortable victory. He's got a margin of something like 16, 17%.
McPherson?
Margaret May comfortably returned. No problems there for Margaret May in the southern Gold Coast seat.
Moncrief, Kathy Sullivan's gone, a new member.
More interesting there was the northern Gold Coast seat. There was a lot of talk of independents running there. Then that all disappeared in the end, and Stephen Chobo, I think the pronunciation is, I must apologise if I've got that wrong, but Stephen Chobo, I may not have his name right, but he's definitely a member of Parliament.
And Moreton, no problem for the Libs there after all.
Gary Hardgrave got a 3.5% swing to him. Gary Hardgrave is returned as a member for Moreton.
Oxley, an infamous seat.
No problems with Bernie Rippold. He's got roughly the same majority as last time. One Nation still have a 10% vote there, but still it's a pretty safe Labor seat.
What about Teresa Gambaro and Petrie? She's had a very marginal seat. Is it any better for her now?
Still marginal, still 3.6%. She did get a 3% swing to her. She still has to do a lot of work next time.
Rankin.
When you're in a marginal seat, you never stop being marginal.
I think that's true.
Craig Emerson, he's got a 2% swing against him, but still holds his seat. It's a pretty safe seat normally in the southern parts of Brisbane.
Now, Ryan, it looks like Leonie Short's had perhaps one of the shortest stay in politics.
She has got a swing to her compared to the 98 election, but basically the result you're seeing there, Michael Johnson is the new member for Ryan. It is basically the same result as at the last federal election. The swing that occurred at the by-election is completely reversed there.
Okay, and the last seat for Queensland Wide Bay.
Warren Truss is returned as the member for Wide Bay. Bit of a vote there for minor parties, but he's returned.
Well, let's take a look now at the Northern Territory, Anthony, where there's a new seat altogether, a brand new seat in the Parliament, and we'll start with the Lingarri, which is an already existing seat, I guess, or an existing member.
Warren Snowden is the existing member for Northern Territory. He's switched to Lingarri, which is the whole of the Northern Territory except for Darwin and Palmerston, and he's won that seat comfortably. He's got a 4% swing to him, in fact, and so Warren Snowden's back in federal Parliament.
That's the sort of result that made Labor think they might pick up Solomon as well, the new seat, have they?
Well, I'll tell you exactly there. You can see that it's neck and neck in Solomon. I'll actually tell you the exact figure. The gap in Solomon is, I think, Labor is ahead by 296 votes after the distribution of preferences. That will go down to preference. That'll be a week and a half before we know Solomon. Solomon is an undecided seat. Labor still has a hope there.
Let's take a look at Western Australia now. Western Australia's a state where they're thought to be perhaps up to 4 seats up for grabs. Labor wasn't confident of hanging on to them. In the end, Labor hasn't taken the hit in WA so far on the early numbers that it was fearing it might.
Well, like the rest of the country, it's been a bit patchy. Now, we've got most of the final figures now. We've been waiting to see all these. Of course, thankfully, now we're doing the callable percent. Kim Beazley, he's roughly got this. He's got a 3% swing against him in the end, but he still has a majority of 10%. So Kim Beazley's returned. No longer the opposition. Keith Woolard, the former head of the AMA, ran for Liberals for Forest and has run third in that election.
What about Canning, the most marginal seat there, I think?
Well, Don Randall looks like he's back in the Parliament. He should. It was a very marginal seat on the new boundaries. This is the electorate of Canning, and Canning has been won by Don Randall by the look of it.
And Cowan, Labor's managed to hang on to Cowan?
Graham Edwards is back in Parliament in Cowan. He's got a 2.5% swing to him. The Liberals had a very young candidate in that electorate.
Graham's a very popular...
If anybody was going to hold the marginal seat, it was always going to be Graham Edwards. He is the highest profile. If you have a criticism of the other Labor members elected last time, they haven't been really high profile. Graham Edwards is, and it shows in the result.
Well, he's a former state minister, of course. What about Curtin?
Julie Bishop's comfortably won the seat. She's got over half the primary vote and a small swing to her after the distribution of preferences. Forrest, Geoffrey Frost is back in Parliament, 4% swing to him. Bit of a vote there for One Nation, but it still all translates into a swing to the Liberal Party in Forest.
And what about Carmen Lawrence in Fremantle?
Sort of 1.5% swing against her. Again, she's gone to preferences, but she still holds that seat very comfortably. It's a seat where the Greens normally do well, and they've got 8.8% of the vote.
There's a new seat in WA formed tonight, Hasluck.
And the Labor Party has retained it after notionally holding it. Sharon Jackson is the new Labor member for Hasluck.
And that's final? We're not still waiting for counting on that?
We're not waiting for final. That's the final counting of preferences.
What about Kalgoorlie?
Barry Haas is the new member, retained his seat. He's got 42.8% of the vote, but after the distribution of preferences, he's got a 2% swing to him and will hold it. It still retains a marginal seat.
And more?
It's held by Mal Washer, and it's been comfortably retained. He won it last time after defeating the independent Paul Filing.
And Wilson Tucker's still with us in O'Connor?
Wilson Tucker is still with us, there's no doubt about that. He's got 50.2% of the vote.
That brings us to Pearce.
Judy Moylan's been returned. She holds the seat of Pearce. Judy Moylan back in the Parliament.
And Perth, the Labor seat.
And we apologise for the loss of the name on some of these elections. We're not sure what it is, but I'll say the name each time. In Perth, Stephen Smith, the Labor member for Perth, is returned. He's got a small swing against him. Stephen Smith is back in Parliament, as is Jan McFarlane, who's managed to hold on to Stirling. No swing in that election. Jan McFarlane is returned.
OK, where do we head to next after
Swan.
Stirling? Swan, of course.
Swan, again, this was a seat I thought would have been in danger. It's not in the end. Kim Wilkie has been returned in Swan. She's the former seat of Kim Beazley.
I was about to say Labor would be quite happy with how they've scored in Perth generally. And that brings us to the final seat in WA, and that's Tangney.
Yep, and the Liberal Party returned that Darryl Williams, the Attorney General. And I think overall, I think you can sort of roughly say a sigh of relief from the Labor Party in the results in just about all these states.
Absolutely. All right, Anthony, well, that brings us back to Kerry.
Thank you, Fran.
That's quite a call of the card, I've got to say.
In fact, I think it's probably the longest call of the card I can remember. I'm not quite sure why. We might, before we go, just do a very brief recap. We've got a situation very clearly where this is a night of triumph for Prime Minister John Howard as he contemplates tonight a third 3-year term. We may have some question mark about whether we will see out that whole 3-year term, but I would think tonight that is just about the furthest thought from his mind. He has set the coalition up to face the next election in a significantly stronger position than it is tonight, if not necessarily in numbers of seats, certainly in the buffer of some of those seats. For Kim Beazley, clearly, this has also been an immensely significant night. This is the night where we see the end of his reign as leader of the Labor Party, and one has to assume before too much longer the end of his time in Australian politics. Cheryl Kernot departs the national political stage tonight, having lost her seat of Dixon to the Labor Party in Brisbane. But a night on which very few seats have actually changed hands, although there are still a number of seats in doubt. And Anthony, one thing we might do before we go is just very quickly have a look at what those seats are that are in doubt.
OK, well, we've just done a quick, complete wrap of everything that's going on.
Braddon, which may